Hey, you are listening to the post-burnout growth podcast with me, Ali, and my lovely companion, Avril. And today we are going to be talking to you about self-leadership. First off, hey, Avril.
Hey, Ali, and hello to our listeners of the Post Burnout Growth podcast. Um, Self-leadership. Ali, why don't you kick us off with what that means to you,
Oh, it
and how
means
you're
so
living
many
it?
things. You might need to reel me in. I guess the approach maybe we can come at it today is what does it mean in relation to attuning to your needs? And what we mean by that, I think I speak for both of us, is what is otherwise known as self-care, um, is attuning to your needs. And attuning to your needs, not to try and be over fancy about it, just means that do you know what your needs are? Do you know when you need them? What's your cues? What's your signs? And how do you meet your needs? How do you lead yourself to meet your needs instead
Mm,
of perhaps what I have experienced and or seen in clients and peers in corporate life and also myself is dismissing your needs, minimizing your needs, abandoning your needs for all sorts of reasons. And, this has a really significant role in general well-being, but especially if you have a few behavioral patterns and thinking patterns that kind of tag team one another to the point where your needs are persistently not met. Um, and needs, when I think about needs in self-leadership, um, I guess they fall into a number of categories or buckets, you could say. So we might want to think about attuning to our emotional needs to feel seen and heard, or perhaps emotional needs to feel cared for, or emotional needs to have a support network and people around us who express their care for us or who are there for us when we need to have a chat, etc., etc. So then we've got maybe, our energy needs. I think we talked about energy in a previous episode. Is what do we need to be able to access our best quality energy that we want to bring to produce those quality results? Inputs equal outputs.
mm,
So those are just first things really sort of jumping off when I think about attuning to our needs and leading ourselves towards them. Um,
mm.
yeah, what about you, Avril?
I think for me, the starting point was actually learning to define what my needs were in the first place.
Mm,
As someone who had long learned to minimize my needs and dismiss them. And I didn't know I was minimizing or dismissing them until I had full and properly burned out. I had to start to get very clear on what I needed. And I still have to do this. It's because it's never a one and done. It's not some arrival point, is what are my needs? What do I need? So I'm just going to, just use some real examples of questions I can still ask myself is, what do I need from this conversation? Or I'm going into, so let's say we're working on this project together, Ali. It's like, what do I need from this project collaboration? What do I need to express in myself? What do I need to offer? Um, it might be, at the end of a long day, or if I notice my energy is flagging, what do I need to give myself? What do I need to offer myself? Um, Sometimes it is, what do I need to recognize? And so it's not something that needs to be, how do I say this? It's not something that I need to meet or do. I just need to simply be present and become aware of its presence. Um, you mentioned, for instance, emotional needs or emotions. And I want to come to it from the sense of, for some of us who have been taught there are good emotions and bad emotions. So, for instance, and I'm using a generalization here, so I apologize. This is not meant to intended to offend. Is women are typically learn that anger is not an emotion we can demonstrate or safely express without being called a bunch of labels. that it's not even safe enough to feel or acknowledge that we are having this emotion and to come at it from that place. Um, so sometimes for me, that has been what do I need to recognize is happening for me? Um, to use a different example, shame, which I am familiar friends with, that this experience of, we might call it um, a deer in the headlights, or why am I procrastinating, whatever. Now, again, I'm not using a generalization here. For each of us, shame will show up in different ways. It depends on so many different life experiences and learning. But learning to just be present with in this experience of anger, in this experience of shame, what do I need to offer myself here? Or what do I just need to be present to? So I think for me, the starting point was what does it mean to even meet my needs so I can do
Mm,
something? But if I don't know what they are,
mm-hmm,
I think one of the hot topics is boundaries, for instance, and we
mm,
have another podcast episode around boundaries. But hey, we could do a whole podcast on that topic, and there's just so much literature and so much awareness around that. But
mm,
boundaries are one of those really, I want to use the word tangible, but if you understand what I mean, those real solid concrete ways in which
mm,
we protect our energy, a way in which we learn to lead ourselves, because we cannot lead others when we are leading, we don't have boundaries for ourselves, or we don't understand what our own boundaries are or around our needs.
mm,
So I think it's one of those things is getting clear on, for me, it was getting clear and getting clarity on what my needs were. And then that next stage of, okay, what needs, how do I need to meet these? What is it for me? It's not, how someone else meets this particular thing. And I think we've again touched upon this on different podcast episodes, is someone else's framework, someone else's way, someone else's strategy, their way of being around meeting their needs is there's no one size fits all.
mm,
Of course, we may be inspired and we may go, hey, that's a good role model for this. But we cannot blanket apply that. We have to, tuning to our needs means we need to really tap into what is it that's important to me in this moment? Why is it that it's important to me in this moment? What's the value, in play here? And then learning to go, actually, I need to offer myself kindness, which I have never done before because I've allowed, the part of me that's an inner critic to just take over. So I'm just using some examples here. Um, but yeah, learning for me was learning what are my needs? What does this, I get to have them? What? This is a radical idea.
mm.
Um, so yeah, in terms of self-leadership, you opened this conversation, Ali, with how do you lead yourself to meet your needs? And so if I was to offer you that question, what comes up for you?
Yeah, something really struck me actually when I was listening to you, as often does, that I feel is quite important to mention. Um, in alignment with self-leadership is you and I have very readily, probably unconsciously, spoke about meeting our needs, like us meeting our needs without too much thought because of where we are in our post-growth burnout journey.
Mm,
And often we tend to operate from a place of feeling like it's something outside of us that needs to meet our needs relationally from others, situations, expectations, rules, assumptions that something has to be a certain way in order for our needs to be met.
yeah.
And also this sense of, there's something out there to meet my needs when we do actually get into awareness and familiarity and self knowledge about
Mm,
what our needs are in general to live well, what our needs are day to day, what our needs are, like you said, for this partnership, what our needs are in the workplace, what our needs are with specific colleagues that we have to interact with on a regular basis or family members. What are our
mm,
needs in each of those contexts? And that's the
yeah.
thing, it's contextual and it's personal.
Love that.
So
Yeah.
I think there's a bunch of things in there to just kind of bring attention to of not just the contextual aspect, but the fact that we have even if we don't think it. And, being coaches, we probably take some of this stuff for granted as well. The idea that we can meet our own needs for the most
Yes.
part. We are not an island. We do need
Mm,
others and we do need connection. And it's probably one of the biggest factors in life that determines your happiness and determines your well-being is the quality of the connections that you have with others. But it all starts with the quality of the connection you have with yourself. And that leads us back to, do you have an awareness of yourself? Do you have knowledge around what your needs are that allow you to function best, to live in your fullest expression, not shrunken, not hidden, not dialed down, not suppressed, not living life in second place, which many of us do, is
mm,
that whole thing of, actually, I have needs and I actually have the capacity and the ability to meet some of those, if not most of them, ourselves.
mm, mm,
So that's a thing I think that we can talk about without noticing that much of the time, the people that I've been around, the clients that I've worked with, think that there's something out there and it has to come from out there, which keeps us in seeker mode. And seeker mode is like striving mode. Very much like we talked about earlier, when it could be workplace related, that we get purpose from our work, which
yes.
then links back into defining our identity, defining our value, defining our worth, because we deem that we are only those things if we're productive, if we're high performance, if we produce results. And so those things can keep us in quite a bind and therefore continue to perpetuate that sense of what we need is out there. So I
Mm,
just wanted to really flag that up because I think it's like when you're driving the car, like when you used to drive the manual cars. I don't know if you drive a manual car, but most people have automatic now. Um, in the beginning when you're learning, you're thinking, oh, I'm changing gear from first to second, I'm picking up speed. Okay, I need to get into third gear, or I'm going up a hill, I need to drop down a gear. But as coaches, as our post burnout growth journey continues to evolve, I think it's easy for us to not notice the change of gear in our mindset, Avril, that you and I are like, I can meet my needs. I have
mm,
an ability to attune to my needs.
yes.
And I think that fundamental capability, often either in burnout, post burnout, or even not in burnout, we tend to not realize we have that capability within ourselves. And that
Yes.
can be quite detrimental to really leading ourselves because we kind of
Mm,
voluntarily give over power to others, which also
yeah.
links into your point around boundaries. Where do I end and you begin?
Mm.
And so, as usual, you've sparked off a ton
Right?
of ideas in me. So I've gone off at a
Good.
tangent, perhaps again, everyone.
No,
So for
you've
those of
been
you who can cope with my tangents, Avril, yeah, I mean, anything there that you want to add to?
the piece around, the fact that we can meet our needs or at least learn to begin to recognize that we can meet our needs. And perhaps for some of us, the growth journey or the post-burnout growth journey might be learning to cultivate that capacity, learning to recognize, okay, where have I previously diminished or minimized? Where have I previously self-abandoned? And we're using some terms here that might be therapy speak or coach speak. We do recognize that. Um, but there's something so empowering in learning to show up for yourself, in learning to go, I have this need and I can meet it. And I want to tag that on to Ali, what you also shared about connection. None of, this work, the work of doing post burnout growth, the work of moving through burnout, where, the starting point might feel or the experience of burnout is very, the intensity of feeling isolated in that experience. Sorry, I was just finding my words there. Where the starting point might feel like being isolated, being alone. I'm not going to let anyone else see this. I'm not going to let anyone know that I'm, running on fumes on the inside, but on the outside, I'm perfectly high functioning. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
delivering results, but everything feels shallow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then coming into that place of not only can I see and recognize these needs, but I am going to have to learn to lean on love, support, connection. I'm going to have to learn to ask for help, and I'm going to have to develop a capacity to be able to receive help. For me, that was a
Mm-hmm.
big part of the journey. Because, and again, we may have touched upon this and in other podcast conversations. I know we've talked about this offline. There's a lot in the growth world and in the coaching world. And for many of us, we might hear this in the workplace, ask for help. Wonderful. That might always seem, that might not be the natural point of safety for us in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, where we might have old historical patterns and old historical learning that is living in our body that has taught us that when we ask for help, help is not coming, or it's not, we're not going to receive it, or we're going to be told off, or there might be consequences for having our needs. So when we, there's some amount of learning and growing through that process and coming into a place of being able to receive help and knowing that that's also an act of love and that's an act of compassion. So to your point around I think it's very empowering for us to be able to be able to recognize that we can meet our needs, but be also um connect to connection is how the words are coming up for me. But yes, just really plug into sense of connection. We are so interconnected. There is so much more help and love and support out there, more than we might recognize in the moment, especially when we're burning out. Um, I know, Ali, you've talked about different mindset shifts as well. And some of the themes that have come up for Ali and myself as we've talked offline, but also through these conversations, is for those of us who might have, patterns or old patterns around hyperachieving, hyper independence, whether these may be trauma responses or not, some of those patterns inherently hold some ideas
Mm-hmm.
around, I've got to do this on my own. I've got to effort in this way. It's I, me, myself. Um, and some of that behavior has been recognized and praised, so it's become the default. And so learning to reach out, learning to accept, learning to become part of the collective. Again, well, reconnect to the collective we already are is I think so much a part of that self-leadership piece. Um, as we begin to close, what I know is a conversation that would probably be in another four parts. Um, Ali, your work primarily focuses and centers on self-leadership, so I want to throw this to you. Um, what would you like to share with our listeners in terms of this specific context and scene we have set today in terms of recognizing your needs? Um, as a
Mm.
self-leadership coach and as someone who does significant pieces of work around this, where can
Yeah,
someone begin to even start with this?
yeah. Self-leadership has a number of pillars that go underneath it that prop up that ability to really lead yourself. And so when you ask me, my brain does shoot off in all the different directions. But if I bring everything back to a starting point, to the foundations, is get your foundations right. And one of the biggest foundations in self-leadership is self-regulation and self-control. Because from personal experience, from science, from being around others, and from me personally having been known as the steady hand on the ship when everybody else is losing their heads in those code red situations, which is what I was particularly good at. Um, Perhaps unsurprisingly so, given some of my background experiences, is that if you are going around your day-to-day life and everything that happens, every small event to some kind of, let's call it molehills, the
Mm-hmm.
molehills of life that are going to pop up throughout the day. And, they're not necessarily convenient things, they're not necessarily ideal. You don't necessarily, perhaps, and not everyone, but you don't necessarily perhaps struggle or wobble at those molehills as they come up in your path. Um, but then you get something that's a bit bigger than a molehill, and let's just shortcut and say you lose it. What do I mean by lose it? Your brain spins off into a number of thinking patterns, survival strategies, narratives, typically from a place of unhelpful, and I will say negative emotion for the sake of simplicity, of emotions that fundamentally make you feel bad. They don't feel good. And so, if you are to truly lead yourself in life, you need to have the awareness of what's happening in the moment presence to go, okay, this situation is challenging. I'm not feeling
Mm-hmm.
good about it. Okay, my first step, if I do nothing else, my first step is to recognize what's happening, recognize the narratives I'm telling myself are out of survival, out of my beautiful brain's intention to protect me from perceived or real threat, from
Mm-hmm.
perceived emotional threat, status threat, it could be. Um, there's all sorts of ways that our brain will leap to the rescue. And, this has kept us as a species alive for as long as we have been alive. So it works incredibly well, albeit it's not very selective. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can, in the moment, say to yourself, okay, this thing that's cropped up in my path today has me feeling reactive, knee-jerk reaction, has me feeling bad, has me feeling uncomfortable. It's from this place that I need to then learn to shift myself, because I cannot lead myself until I've shifted myself. And I mean, shift yourself into a place of calm, shift yourself into a place of neutral emotion,
Mm-hmm.
possibly even shift yourself into a place of positive, let's call it happier, supportive, helpful emotions that lift you and lift your energy, as opposed to pull you down and make you feel weighted. And then from that place of neutral or positive emotion, you then decide what you're going to do. You then start to be able to access the creative resources that do
Yeah.
naturally lie inside of you. But unfortunately, when we're in those spaces of reactive, hot, heavy emotions, that part of us gets shut down. And
Mm.
so we don't have access to the best resources we possibly could to lead ourselves in the moment, or even just decide to pause and step back before we then decide what's the real action here that I want to take or that I need to take.
Mm.
So really shifting the balance in your mind is learning how to do that, learning how to command your mind in those day-to-day situations, above all else, is the foundations of self-leadership. Because if you're out of control from a nervous system point of view, that you're feeling in fight, flight type, states, um, if you are just feeling instantly threatened or negative or bad in some way, you're just definitely not going to produce a positive, supportive, helpful, preferred outcome. And it comes back down to, I don't know if it's been attributed, I think, to Einstein, but whether it is or not, I don't know. But I think I always get this round the wrong way. So feel free to Google this one, anyone, if I say it back to front. But it's that thing of the mind is a terrible master. And we have to be cognizant of its autopilot modes and its autopilot, you know, yeah, it's autopilot modes really in the sense of that survival brain will override just about everything else. And if we can buy into that fact that we always need to buy ourselves time, even if it's a few seconds, a few minutes, an hour, a day, sleep on it, just allow yourself that space in order to lead yourself better. Very long winded as usual, but yeah, that's what I would say.
Mm. Yeah. I'd love to add a trauma-informed lens here as well. Um, Especially from the point of view that some of us might be living disconnected from our bodies. And so from the experience that's happening, if any of us have come across the terms of somatic work and somatic experiencing. Um, what you shared there, Ali, about the nervous system states as well, about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. Um, what I noticed in my own journey, but also in the work that I've had to do through therapy and coaching, and then the work I now do with clients in trauma recovery, is often enough the sometimes the starting point can feel is that we are up in our heads trying to make the goals happen. And what's happening in reality, or at least under the surface, is there's the somatic experience that we are disconnected from. And so we are putting ourselves forward. I'm using some we language here because I'm just creating a collective experience. I know some of my clients will listen to these conversations as well. We are putting ourselves forward for goals and actions and results and these milestones while simultaneously either disregarding, willfully or not, disregarding, maybe we just haven't learned to recognize the somatic experience of where we are. And so we might call it different things. And again, I'm using loose language here. So, because I'm aware that you do the work around self-sabotage and things. So I'm using these terms very loosely in terms of what's happening all over social media, where people go, oh, I procrastinate and I self-sabotage and this got in the way and that. But often enough, it's us recognizing what is happening in the body as well. So just to bring that trauma-informed lens as well, for some of us, that bottom-up approach, in addition to the top-down approach, might be what we might need more in terms of, or we might need full stop, in terms of how we are retraining the nervous system. We are learning to build that inner sense of safety. Because if a default has been for fight or flight or freeze, for me, for instance, if I was to share transparently, if I share transparently my experience, functional freeze is probably where I found myself, but I would not ever call it procrastination. It was a sense of deep fear and terror. And it was like, oh, I need to push past this. So I might have used language like, I need to get my confidence up, or I'm just getting in my way, while not recognizing that actually something has happened or not happened in some past events and experiences that have taught my nervous system to go into a freeze state. And that has, to use, some of the language you've shared before, it's the survival pattern, but it has sort of outlived its time. And so it's now time to approach this. So bringing that trauma-informed lens as well, when we are working through our self-leadership piece, through our goals, we need to, I want to just offer this idea, take what you need, leave the rest, is work at it with pace, with your coach, with your mentor, with your therapist, whoever's your, preferred or appropriate professional partner at that point, is to work at it with pace. We are not running a race. We're not running someone else's race. And so even as you approach your goals, having that sense of compassion for why am I not meeting this level of, I don't want to use the word results or performance, but if you find yourself falling to against your own success metrics for that goal, what's happening, being curious about what's happening underneath it, and then
Mm,
going, do I need to chunk this goal down a little bit more? Do I need to bring this down to smaller pieces that will encourage a sense of safety? Um, because as you were sharing as well, Ali, as we are retraining the brain and the nervous system are all functioning in that system, is how do we create that sense of safety? And then, this, I love this analogy. I heard it on I won't claim any ownership of this because I learned it on a trauma-informed leadership coaching course that I was on. It's like opening a tap of water in a basin. If you opened it all the way full out and you've got full flow, it will just, everything will, the water's going to splash out everywhere. And that's what happens when we rush in and we are hitting our goals without a sense of what's happening in the somatic experiencing, in the felt sense. And so, working with appropriate professionals, working with skilled professionals who can help you turn on the tap just enough to go,
Mm,
just this trickle, just this level of flow is enough. And going into, if you've heard the terms, going into your stretch zone where growth happens. So we're
mm-hmm,
going past where the trickle might be comfortable, but we're just turning the tap on a little bit more to
mm-hmm,
find our inner sense of safety. So we go to that sort of, to use the word, we kind of go to that limit, we stretch ourselves into it, and then we come back down. So just being able to breach that edge a little bit, make that the new
mm,
familiar, make
mm-hmm.
that the new baseline, um, can also help us. So yes, from a self-leadership point of view, I just want to add that there. If you do have a history of trauma and or you are becoming aware of what might be holding you or your nervous system in certain states, is becoming curious about we, becoming curious about what's happening under the surface. Um, this isn't about fixing yourself. Where this is the work of coaching and growing and healing and coming into post burnout growth. Is we are complex human beings. We are funny, weird human beings, and we continue to grow and evolve all of the time, one day to the next.
Mm,
So curiosity, compassion, showing up for yourself, keeping your promises to yourself, um, honoring your needs. These are all different things we've been talking about in terms of learning to build your capacity to lead yourself.
mm-hmm,
And what a privilege it is. What a privilege to show up for ourselves, to get to
mm.
know ourselves. Um, Ali and I have also been talking about this, and if you are listening to multiple episodes in our podcast, you will hear this theme around, what an opportunity to get to know yourself, to learn more about yourself and your needs. Um, so yeah, that's been a lot in this conversation.
Yeah, I think we went off in so many different directions there, but I guess
Yeah.
it's quite challenging when we are shown up unfiltered,
Yes.
unproduced, to given the work that we do, given the work we've done, given the work we continue to do with ourselves and with others, that there's a lot of overlap in many different areas
Yeah.
about knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like self-awareness, it just is not a given that you really know yourself because life from a young age through your adolescence into your adulthood, we are socially shaped beings. And the social
Mm,
influence of others as we journey through childhood and adulthood kind of leaves their mark on us in different
yeah.
ways that we often don't realize we're carrying. We often don't realize we're carrying and that it's shaping us in terms of how we relate with ourselves, how we relate with others, how we relate with situations. And this stuff that you've just talked about, this privilege to really take the time to learn about yourself. It's not a once and done, it's not a quick overnight thing.
Mm,
But by doing so, it positions you, it's another foundational element of living well, that it positions you to identify your needs because your needs will always change. They're going to move. They're going to be different depending on the context and the situations we spoke about. And attuning to your needs from a place of connectedness that you
mm,
understand your relation with even that need, whether that is a need that you need others to support you in meeting, or whether it's a need that you can by part way go towards giving to yourself, like kindness, we've talked about, like compassion.
Mm,
and so on and so forth. Like rest, we've talked about a lot. Like, I'm going to give myself, you know, a boundary here, and I'm going to
mm,
communicate that with others by way of giving myself what I need in order to show up at my best. But I think that it's just not a once and done. There's lots of things in here. And I guess what I'm trying to say by way of wrapping up today is when you listen to Avril and I particularly anyway, my brain tends to dart off in a lot of directions just by default, which sometimes can be a little bit challenging for those listening. But it's through my passion, it's through my intentionality to just want to share as much as possible about things that quite often we just don't talk about. And Avril, you've said it
mm,
loads of times. Like we don't get taught this stuff. We find it out
mm.
by default. We find it out as a consequence of something else.
Yeah.
And then we go, oh my God, like, like Dr. Julie Smith's book. Why has nobody told me this before?
Yeah. And it's a great book.
That kind of
Yeah.
sums it up a lot. And
Yeah.
so it's in that real passion and heartfelt love for wanting to share in some shape or form, unfiltered and unedited with you, that we will
Mm,
cross over lots of topics in different language. But hopefully you can connect with us. I'd certainly be happy to have a conversation with anyone to explore some of the topics we've talked about, or just to kind of get a sense of what did you mean by that? Or where might I go next? Or what might be a good step for me to embark
mm.
upon this self knowledge? Because often in life, we just need that next step. So hopefully today that's something that we might have given to you. Any thoughts you want to add to that?
Very beautifully said. There's nothing I particularly want to add other than um, it is a joy to do the work of learning who you are, how you are, what you like, what you love, how you function. Um, Burnout is a deep and intense experience, and in the midst of it, it is very difficult and very hard. I understand this. I knew it was like not to be able to function for a very long time and to not know when the light at the end of the tunnel would even be visible. It was just a very difficult and dark place. But I want to offer this message of hope in that there is help available. There are people available. And sometimes the first step can look like telling someone, whoever that might be for you, find you know who your safe people are, is telling those safe people how you're feeling. If you're struggling with overwhelm, if you're struggling with brain fog, if you need to dial down some things at work, um, even if it is getting the support enough to have the conversation. So, for instance, one of the real life examples I get a lot in my coaching work, what I had to learn to do for myself is how do I have the conversation where I actually say in all my words, I can't take this on, or I can only take so much on. I need different working hours. I need to finish work by this time. I cannot commit to this meeting. So these are very real. And sometimes it's the feeling undone, feeling like we are powerless to use those, to use the language. And Ali has talked about this very well in many conversations, the meaning making that if I say these things, how am I going to be perceived in the workplace? And for both Ali and I, coming out of corporate, we understand firsthand um, what it means to be in highly visible roles, in high pressure environments, fast paced growth, where one is constantly in a state of, movement, momentum, delivering all of these results, smashing all of these boundaries and goals. So yes, it might, the first step might be looking at who in your network can support you, going to them and asking them to help you, even if it means helping you get a conversation together. Um, and as Ali has said, our links in terms of how you can reach out to us, how you can connect with us, how you can have that first step conversation if either one of us can support you with that journey. All of the links are included in our podcast show notes or in our podcast channel description. Um, but yeah, we would love to hear from you. And as Ali said, this isn't just about kicking off a working partnership. Sometimes that first conversation is, hey, I need help understanding this. Can you help me wrap my
Mm.
head around this? And this is what, Ali and I set out to do, is to have the conversations perhaps we needed, each of us needed to hear when we were in the thick of burnout, and to receive that level of encouragement that says, hey, help is here, support is here. Um, so yeah, that's all I wanted to close out with. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Post Burnout Growth podcast. These are unfiltered, in the moment conversations where we share personal stories of burnout, recovery, and growth to inspire and comfort those of you who are on a similar path. If you loved our conversation, we hope you will continue to join us and to find connection, insight, and renewed resilience. If what you heard today was helpful, you found hope in it, you were encouraged to take the next step, we hope you will hit the subscribe button to continue to follow our channel. And if you know anyone who might be helped by this conversation, you're like, oh, I know someone, they're in this place and they might listen to this and find their own spark of recognition, we hope you will share this with them. So thank you for listening into today's conversation. It's goodbye from Ali and me.
Thanks, everyone.